the next level is going to be beyond automation, right? Which is autonomous systems. And the fundamental difference between those two is that automation is you give them very concrete steps and then they follow those steps. Whereas autonomous systems are, making decisions on their own.
Yeah.
And that is going to be epic.
Hi, welcome back to The Futurist. I'm your host, Brett King. I'm running solo today because Rob is recording another session separately for the show. So, but it's fortuitous, actually. We had an event a few weeks ago in Dubai where a bunch of futurists gathered. It was around the time of the Future Forum. And I was in town and got together with my good friend Tariq Qureshi, who you guys know from the Futurist Summit, and obviously he's been on the show a few times, and helped us co-host some episodes actually that are upcoming from the Futurist Summit. But while we're there, I caught up with Cecilia Tham. Cecilia is a futurist working on more systems design, but we're going to get into that in some sort of specifics. Cecilia is the CEO of Futurity Systems, and she is a PhD level researcher on algorithmic futuring, which we're going to get into. Cecilia Tham, welcome to The Futurists.
Thank you so much for having me, Brett.
Very fortuitous that we met up in Dubai at the gig that Voices of the Future put on with Tariq. But let's start with the simple piece. First of all, what does Futurity Systems do, and what's algorithmic futuring? I guess that's just trying to model the future, right?
Let me see how I should get started with this. It has been a long journey, but Futurity System, basically what we do is we help companies and government organizations to prepare for the future. And so we started out, I would say, working with Telefonica, which is a big telecom company back in 2018. And there was a need to kind of look into the future and create what's called the moonshot factory. And a lot of companies have been working on that. So from there, we kind of created a lot of frameworks from the perspective of how companies can be more prepared for the future. And when we left, they shut down, unfortunately, in 2020, actually, during COVID. And we thought,
well, there's a lot of things shut down during that time.
I know, it's a pity, but we decided let's just create our own company that can do that for different companies. Okay. And that's what it does. And there are 4 specific things that we do. We do deep tech research. From the research, then we ideate and create possibilities into the future space, future products and services. And then from there, we prototype physical manifestation of those ideas. And then the last thing is strategic kind of backcasting to understand how those could be implemented. And so that's basically the nutshell of what we do.
Okay. So, this is, we talk often about methodologies and sort of process on this piece, but let's sort of take a step back from that. And, what was, you mentioned it was a long path, but what was the career path that got you to this point? So what was the expertise that you draw upon? What awakened your interest in future-proofing, organizations? How did you start on the journey?
That's a good question, because when I was studying, there wasn't like future designed back then. And so I studied architecture. And before architecture, I studied neuroscience and biology, thinking that I was going to be a doctor. Obviously, that didn't happen. But then I think the shift was when I participated in the Singularity program. Right. And there I learned all about moonshots and exponential thinking. And I thought, wow. Yeah. And I thought that was kind of the key, and understanding especially exponential technologies and how that could help us leverage to make changes into the future. And then from there, then it was Telefonica. And there we created a lot of the framework and methodologies, which led to our book, which is Synthesizing Future. And this is
cool.
a little bit like design thinking, but more future driven. And so that's our approach.
Oh, that's great. Well, that makes sense. The Telefonica stuff, was that about infrastructure resilience, or was it about what were they really interested in respect to future proofing themselves, and how did that sort of come about?
It's interesting because a lot of the companies, especially large organizations like Telefonica, have the same issue, right? And so at that time, they actually look into Google X. And they reached out to Google X and say, can we create a Google X, but in Europe? And they partner with them because that's the framework that they wanted to use. And so that was a partnership. But there were three main things that they were looking into, and I think that's really, really fascinating. The first one is what could become $1 billion business, right? There needs to be a business case behind it. The second thing was how can they create impact, and by impact that could be whether being able to decrease, the carbon footprint, or whether it is creating more jobs. There was a kind of framework to calculate the metrics on impact. And then the third thing is there an IPable technology that they could defend? Those are the three criteria of what they considered as a moonshot. And we continue using that framework to help companies and even government organizations to understand how those, what qualifies as a moonshot. And so obviously not technologies that are, much more, simple in the sense that like social media or, digital transformations. Those are not considered as high impact form of technology.
Understood. In terms of the process for you, you've spoken about how singularity was a sort of foundational to that. Actually, I remember the first few times I heard Peter describe exponentiality, and how he used to do with the steps out of the theater sort of thing. That I think that was a great illustration. But singularity brought together a group of really interesting people. So how did that interaction with that sort of peer group influence your approach these days?
I think fundamentally they exposed, and I realized that technology has become so transformative that we need to understand how the impact of those technologies could be incorporated. That's number one. Singularity was able to bring all these experts into the conversations that otherwise we wouldn't be able to have access to. That's number one. And the second thing is, how do you translate those into solutions? Because a lot of times, and this is a little bit of a criticism, then a lot of the large consultancy firms, what they do is they provide much more of a theoretical, solution. So report at best.
Right. Particularly the McKinsey style consultants, right?
Yes, yeah. And so how do you translate that into actionable terms? And this is why prototyping for us was very much needed. And during Singularity, I met Tom Chi, and we remained close with Tom Chi. In fact, there's a chapter here contributed by Tom Chi in the book that we have created. And Tom Chi had this idea of prototype thinking. So how do you think through those solutions with tangible, prototyping means? And that's kind of fundamental also in kind of that translation.
I mean, the tools for prototyping have just changed so significantly. I mean, not only can you model in simulated environments, you can prototype things with a lot of granularity and detail now.
Absolutely. And we often say that it's cheaper to prototype than to do a PowerPoint now.
Yeah. I can see that. It makes sense, especially if you've got real world environments fully coded up, and So there's that, but there's also if you want to do real world prototyping, like 3D printing and some of that tech enables you to do some of that stuff. I guess that all of that technology is going to get better and better over time for the whole prototyping thing.
And I would say exponentially. You can use, Claude to code fast. You can use Lovable to prototype an app. I mean, the time and the resources and the cost to prototype really has dropped, significantly. So,
I mean, so
that's a shift.
you talk about the moonshot programs and the billion dollar concepts. One of the things Sam Altman's been talking a lot about recently is he thinks it's possible that you could create $1 billion company today with a single employee with AI, right? Now we could debate that if that's actually possible right now today, or how far away from that we are. But the implication is that any $1 billion business could be run by a single individual. That's the other implication, which is going to lead to sort of broad technology unemployment. I know we're veering off the course here, but what's your thinking in respect to that?
I think it is true. I don't know if it is today, but it's going to be a near future. But he's not the first person who said that, right? Max Tegmark in his book Life 3.0, the first chapter, he already talked about how machines and algorithms are optimized, and they will be able to make money much faster and easier than any human can do. So eventually, I wholeheartedly believe that money will be quite insignificant. Because if machines can make money, then...
But that's it. I mean, look, I mean, Elon has said the same thing very recently, and I've argued that the more automation you put in the system, the less utility money itself will have, right?
Exactly.
And the whole idea about the abundance economy and having this high level of automation is that you can have a high standard of living for everybody, but it's on an automated basis, right? And you won't need to work in the same way you do these days, but we'll have to create some sort of work. Otherwise, we'll have lots of mental health issues and we'll atrophy. But there's a lot that can be done, science, exploration, etc. It's like it frees us up in many ways. But the problem is, if I ask you, what do you do today? Your answer is, I'm an economic contributor to the system. I'm a unit of currency creation in GDP. Like that's, that's how we think of people today. And so, when you have large scale automation coming into play and you can't employ people, so therefore they can't get access to the wealth that's created by the machine, right? Then, you have a core system problem, right? And I think that's, I know I'm getting very esoteric now, but
no, not at all. I would add, in addition to the automation that is up and coming, is that the next level is going to be beyond automation, right? Which is autonomous systems,
right?
And the fundamental difference between those two is that automation is you give them very concrete steps and then they follow those steps, whereas autonomous systems are, making decisions on their own.
Yeah.
And that is going to be epic. And I talked a little bit I wrote an article about this potential future of what we're calling like the digital souls. And I imagine the future of work, for example, like if I could have multiple digital twins, but we call them digital souls, and they could go out and make money for me.
Yeah.
And then I don't have to work. The physical.
Yeah.
Don't have to work. And what would that world look like, So one of the different scenarios that we kind of look into.
No, I mean, we had Dave Shapiro on the show. I don't know if you know him. He's at the West Coast of the US, but he talks about the meaning economy. Mm-hmm. And that, in a world where you have UBI and you have high levels of automation, then people will want to do something really meaningful and purposeful because you'll have the free time to do that. And some of the UBI trials that we've seen around the world tend to lend some support to those theories, because when you see people on UBI or on those sort of schemes, then they have less incidence of mental health issue. They start their own businesses at 3 times the rate of the general population. I mean, there's a lot of very promising data that indicates that in a an economy where we had sort of massive wealth generation and massive automation, that a UBI would be quite transformational in giving people, some purpose, right?
Well, for sure, for sure. Yeah. And I often think about the fact that a lot of our resources, natural resources, including food itself, are wasted
Yeah.
because we don't know how to properly recycle. We don't, poorly managing, the food that we need. But in the world of, what we're calling A-commerce, autonomous commerce, which is the second kind of the evolution of e-commerce, when we can optimize autonomous vehicles and delivery systems so that these loss will be minimized, then, perhaps we could have a much better way to transact and, leverage the resources, the natural resources that we have for our consumption. And what does that world look like in the future? That's also a question that we ask.
Well, I know also, Mark, who was, one of the speakers, Mark Buckley, who was one of the speakers at the event we both attended. And Mark and I have often had the discussion about, the Club of Rome study in 1970 that talked about the limits to growth theory, right? That, we're going to run out of, because, when you have that automation, you can automate everything. And at that point, you could consume all of the resources on the planet with sufficient automation and extinct ourselves through consumerism, right? So we have to stop before it gets to that point, right? That was the argument of the limits to growth work.
Yeah.
But
There's, yeah.
But we're not really making systemic changes that will lead us away from that potential cliff, right, at the moment. So, I mean, we're getting better and more efficient at producing things, at prototyping things and getting them through to production. That cycles go down, going to go down to hours and, from, with these highly automated systems where you could ship across the world, et cetera. So there's some really interesting implications about how we sort of think of systemically about reorganizing in the future and what should be the drive of this sort of incredible autonomy that we're building.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I think one of the things that we need to invest more in is that when we're talking about these autonomous systems, that they're not only used to produce, if not, also look into the life cycle and the end use of a product. And if we kind of, Mark talks a whole lot about regenerative systems, and if we can kind of create the loop and really understand how that
be more efficient at recycling and food production, more efficient, vertical farming tech, etc. Shorter supply and demand cycles, less distance to travel, all of those things.
Yeah. And this is all kind of a post-capitalistic way of thinking, right? Because it's no longer sustainable.
But I mean, this is how many futurists do you know that are super capitalist? Because I think if you're a good futurist, you have to sort of be thinking about post-capitalism.
For sure.
Right?
For sure. But one of the problem and the issue of futuring is that, our world is becoming more and more complex.
Yeah.
Technology is moving faster and faster. And it gets to a point where the complexity, and this is where system design is so important, and complexity and chaos, and the understanding of that kind of chaos is needed, is that kind of the human way of futuring is no longer sufficient.
Yeah.
So how do you incorporate all of those, aspects into your work? And I think this is one of the reasons why I went back to get my PhD, because I wanted to know how AI and big data could help us vet through this complexity.
And what conclusion did you come to?
So, I'm sure you know that in the futuring world, there's this really well-known framework called the unknown quadrant, which is one axis is, what you don't know, what you don't understand. And then the other axis is what you're not aware of. And so my research...
Donald Rumsfeld made famous, really.
Yes, correct. And so, through my research, I was trying to understand, well, okay, how is there a way to ground some of these unknowns, or to understand what we don't know we don't know using these AI systems, whether it is predictive analysis or whether it is Gen AI for scenario planning. Is it possible for us to look into all of this complexity using AI? And there's some really promising research in the horizon for those things. And I think that's interesting to incorporate. But on the other side, we need to be aware of all of the biases, right? I mean, AI has its limitations. And so that's what I'm interested in.
That's fascinating. I mean, that ability to sort of think about systems design, but now incorporating AI, I think is going to be such a huge area of growth. But Cecilia, I think we're running up against the clock. Two things I want to cover off just before we finish. First off is you mentioned briefly in passing digital souls, and I know you've done some work on that yourself. You demonstrated some of that technology when we were together last time. But if you could just sort of give us a brief summary of what that is and why that's sort of important in the scheme of things. And then we've got the quick fire questions for you.
Great. So the digital soul idea was, what if we have replicas? What if I created or you created a digital twin, a CEO digital twin of Brett King, and then create another one that is a health digital soul of Brett King, and then a professor Brett King, as many of these replicas or extension of your physical Brett King, right? And then the CEO one can go out and give talks and make money. The professor can go and teach classes and make money, and they come back to you and report to you and give you hand over their money and manage your life for you. And then you can set the different autonomy level of power that they can execute these things, and even transactionability. What if that some of them can not only make money for you, but also, let's say, make appointments for you or buy equipments for you. And so you just, do you remember this movie? Oh, no, I don't remember. There was this movie where there were multiple clones of oneself.
Yeah. Multiplicity, I think it was called. But yeah.
Multiplicity. So exactly. Yeah. So a little bit of that world. Also in extension that what if, your CEO digital soul could be possessed into, let's say, an autonomous vehicle and will take you because it knows all of your conferences that you need to go to. And so they can possess and manifest into physical, devices that could extend our capability into the real world. That was the exercise that we did. And so I create my own digital twin, and I posted in this platform where people can actually pay to talk to me. No one wanted to talk to me yet, but the idea is like, can I actually test this out? And so this was the kind of the prototyping aspect of it.
Very cool. Well, just to finish off for today, we have what we like to do is to get to know our guests a little better. We have the lightning round and just ask you a few short, punchy questions, and you can give us some feedback, help us get to know you a bit better. So, Cecilia, this is the lightning round. What was the first science fiction you remember being exposed to on TV or via media?
It has to be Back to the Future.
Oh, really? There you go.
Yes.
Which we just surpassed the date of Back to the Future.
I know.
Recently,
crazy, right?
Yeah. What technology do you think has most changed humanity?
It depends on the timeline. I mean, this is a long-winded answer. I mean, I even considered fire as a form of technology, like eyeglasses. But just to name a few: electricity, internet, AI, autonomous vehicles. Those are going to be the key ones, and then quantum in the near future.
Yeah, quantum. Oh, we didn't even get into that today. Name a futurist or entrepreneur that's influenced you.
I have to say Amy Mullen. Amy Mullen, for those who don't know her, she's this amazing athlete, model. She was born without legs, and she had done this TED Talk actually, about how that actually empowered her to translate the handicap into a superpower. And I think that is amazing.
I mean, Dr. Hugh Herr is very similar to that. Just amazing story.
Exactly.
Okay. So what is the best prediction that a futurist or a science fiction author or whoever has made in your assessment?
I don't really. Let me explain this. I don't really think of prediction as a good way to assess outcome. So back into this mindset of prototyping, if we can actively make future happen, that is the best way of predicting the future. So that would be my
good answer. All right, and finally, is there some science fiction story or some futurist depiction that's most representative of the future you hope for?
I'm currently reading The Ministry of the Future, and it is probably one of the best that I have read that is very science. So.
It's very prescient, I think. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And interviewed Kim Stanley Robinson on this show, and was probably he was just an amazing guest. So
amazing.
Just real privilege to have had him on the show. Cecilia Tham, thank you very much for joining us on The Futurist today.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's great. And we'll stay in touch. And, when your next book comes out or you've got a new project you want to talk about, please come back on.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Cecilia. All right. That's it for The Futurist this week. And you know how it goes. We thank the team at Provoke Media, help us put together the show every week, including our producer, Elizabeth Severins, and our editor and engineer, Kevin Hersham, and indeed the whole team there at Provoke. That's it for the episode this week. Please stay tuned for more episodes of The Futurists. And as you know, we will see you in the future.
Well, that's it for The Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.